From my early 20s to my mid to late 30s, I was a Garda officer in Ireland. That's what we call police in Ireland. I served in a small community on the west coast, isolated from any other community. No trains, no nearby airport, no taxis, no Uber, and only one bus a day. This is probably the only reason they had their own Garda station. Most other small hamlets just rely on the Garda from the nearest town. But given this town's absolute isolation in a very small country, they needed this station. The hamlet covered a wide area of farm plots and a number of empty and derelict properties. When Ireland became industrialized, most people in these rural communities moved out to go to the cities in hopes of easier and better paying jobs. The hamlet has a very creepy feeling to it. Most residents here are some of the most down-to-earth people on the planet. But, to the story. Our Garda station consisted of 3 112 dispatchers. Most calls were routed to another 112 center, around 7 officers, most from out of town. We all know each other well, and when we do get a call from the area, even if it is not an important issue, most of us come down just so we have something to do during our long shifts with very little activity. One night, we received a call from a landline phone originating from a derelict property on the edge of the hamlet, isolated from the other plots of land. I was asked to go alone, as every officer this side of the county was attending a fatal 3-car and 2 lorry crash that occurred on a nearby motorway. So I walked outside to the cold wind blowing over my skin, got in my car, and drove down to the property. No light, no sirens. The call had been a hang-up, lasted no longer than 13 seconds according to dispatch. As I pulled up to the blackened, beat-up property, I felt a shiver go down my spine. The old wooden farmhouse gave a feeling that I cannot describe or put into words. I didn't feel like I was welcome. I got out of my car, walked to the front of the property, opened the moldy, wet gate, and slowly approached the tall front door. I knocked heavily and exclaimed, "Hello, this is Officer Kyle. I'm from the Garda. Would you let me in?" I got no response. After waiting for 20 seconds or so, I knocked again and asked, "Hello, I'm afraid that if you do not answer the door, I may have to make forced entry. Please come to the door. This is the Garda." Again, no response. I almost wished there was, though, just so I would feel less lonely and vulnerable. I got on the radio and asked dispatch for backup, and that there could be people in the property, and I needed to make forced entry, as no one was answering the door. They replied, saying that I should keep an eye on the property, and they could have an officer from the closest town over here in 25 minutes. I grunted to myself and thanked dispatch. I strolled back to my car, but before I could reach to open the gate at the front of the house, I looked back and saw an old, ill-looking man, unshaven, stare down at me from an attic window. I stared back in shock, pulled out my flashlight, turned it on, and flashed it at the window. The man ducked down. I shouted up at the window, "Sir, you need to come down and get the door. I need to talk to you. We have more Garda officers on the way. Come downstairs." I was unsettled by what was turning into. I informed dispatch of the man, and they replied saying that they will inform the incoming Garda car that they should turn on sirens and get down here as fast as possible. Dispatch seemed uneasy, to say the least. I stood by the front gate, still no one at the front door, just scanning all of the windows, expecting to see that face. I just couldn't get the man's face out of my mind. He just looked so disturbed. After maybe 20 minutes of the occasional knock on the door and the expected non-existent reply, the car finally pulled up. I informed the two officers inside of the situation, and we approached the front door, and one of the officers exclaimed in a deep, angry voice, "Sir, please get the door before we have to get the door for you. As it appears you will not get the door, we need to inform you of how this is going to work. We will knock this door down. Upon our entry, you will stand, hands up, on the other side of the room we enter from. We will handcuff you, and you will be taken to the station, questioned, or detained. If you have a problem with this, then be sure to ask. When you're in our Garda cars, that is." The officers were so demanding. I almost felt like he was talking to me. He was a very tall and threatening man. We walked back to his car, and he took out what he called the big red key, a big hunk of metal that we used to break down doors safely while not damaging the door. The two officers grabbed the key, walked to the door, and said, 1, 2, 3, barge, and hit the door 4 solid times before it fell down in one big thump. The house was now open. We grabbed our flashlights in one hand and tasers in the other. We took our first steps inside, and I could hear the shard of glass crunching under our feet. The other officer shouted, "Sir, Garda officers have entered the property. Please reveal yourself with your hands in the air. We are armed with tasers that we are authorized to use." We moved forward slowly, shining the small beams of white light into all corners of the apparently empty living room. Upon noticing the absence of the man in the single downstairs room, we shone our lights up the crooked-looking stairs. But before we could even begin to move up the stairs, a man jumped from the upper floor and onto the stairs. And I mean jumped. He looked insane with his large red eyes, staring into my soul. I shouted at the massive beast the man was, "Sir, please place your hands above your head, very slow." Before I could finish my sentence, the man charged down the stairs yelling. One of the officers screamed, "Taser, taser, taser!" And the man let out a gut-wrenching yell of pain as he flopped to the ground, and we ran towards him, handcuffs ready. We grabbed the man, who wouldn't stop rumbling on about a supposed big man who gave him food every day. We placed him in the back of my car. The other officers drove behind me as we headed back to the station. In the car, I did the ordinary, told him his rights and everything that comes with that. But before I could finish, he kept asking if I could tell his ex-wife to get out of the car because she was being rude. I told him that it was just me and him in the car, but he wouldn't stop going on about it. We arrived at the station. We walked the man to the front desk, and when asked for his name, he just replied, "The man you all want to know." Eventually, we put his name and other information as simply unknown. The next day, we were told that the man was going to be picked up by the Irish Intelligence Service. Apparently, once my colleagues had got the name out of the man, he was wanted for stalking of a minor, child abuse, 3 charges of that, and possession of CP. Knowing what this creepy man had been involved in made it so much worse for me to think about it. Once the service came to pick him up, the man told every officer in the station that he would find a way to get us and do what God has told me to do. Ask a cop which day of the year they dread working the most. 1 or 2 might answer Christmas or Super Bowl Sunday, and I get that. But 9 out of 10 will give you the same tired look before they utter one single word: Halloween. Halloween might just be some light-hearted, spooky fun for some, but for law enforcement, It's no joke. The small New England town I serve in has a spike of about 6 or 7 times the number of emergency calls on Halloween night alone. It really does bring out the absolute worst in people. I mean, there's the stuff we anticipate every year. Ungenerous houses having suffered a barrage of weaponized eggs, trees covered in toilet paper, and homeowners complaining of juvenile trespassers. Those calls are manageable, but they bog down on our duty officers so that when serious crimes happen, we're dangerously understrength. But of all the dumbass Halloween mischief I've had to respond to over the years, all of it pales in comparison to what I found at the house on the end of Jefferson Street. That was a Halloween night I don't think I'll ever forget. I had just responded to a call regarding a group of teenagers who had apparently been engaging in some pretty aggressive trick-or-treating, all without costumes. That type of crap is exactly why I hate Halloween. No, what they were doing wasn't strictly illegal, but I can't exactly have a bunch of knuckle-draggers making trouble on a night like that. Especially not with the hundreds of excited kids roaming the streets. I lectured them. They rolled their eyes, but I joined the force to get into the car, chase with bad guys, not argue semantics with a bunch of stoned brats. They walk away, muttering stuff that I chose to ignore, while I get back in my patrol car. The radio almost immediately buzzes to life. My dispatcher says something over the radio involving this rundown house over on Jefferson Street. I start up the car, listening as she describes a member of the public calling to report that the house has Halloween decorations that were too scary. She then says it's the second call that day, and I should go over and check it out if I have a minute to spare. She always did have a sense of humor. She knew damn well I was off my feet. We had a little laugh about it. Like I said, we get some seriously ridiculous calls on Halloween. It's not just dumb kids. It's bitter old misers and party poopers who honestly just resent people having a good time. This one good Christian lady calls us every year over trespassing trick-or-treaters. Kids. Who calls the cops on actual children? Anyway, I carry on about my duties, responding to calls and generally keeping an eye out for trouble. A few hours slips by, the sun sets, the smaller kids led by their parents disappear back into their homes until it's just a few older groups on their way to parties and whatnot. Then, the dispatcher gets on to me about this house on Jefferson, says she's had 3 or more calls about the decorations, how they're scaring kids and even some parents, and she needs me to roll over there to check it out. Great. Arguing with some slasher movie obsessed hermit who's probably about to get all sovereign citizen on me. Just what I need to make me feel like a guardian of the innocent. Sometimes I feel like the world's grumpy stepfather, honestly. So I take the ride over there to the smaller part of town that's a little more run down, arriving on Jefferson. I see the house immediately. There was absolutely no missing it. The old, colonial-looking place was covered in Halloween decorations. Cardboard standees of vampires and zombies. A ton of fake cobwebs all over the porch. I think I counted like 20 carved pumpkins dotted all over the lawn. Pretty intricate designs too. But hanging from a large oak just to the side of the house was the most disturbing Halloween decoration I had ever seen. Not disturbing because it looked real. The limbs of the figure were too rigid, the hair a little too artificial, but the placement of the thing, Jesus, it really did set me on edge as I stared out of the patrol car at it. The figure hung by a rope from one of the oak tree's long, thick branches, drifting gently in the crisp fall breeze. Look, I'm a cop. I've seen some stuff. I don't frighten easily. I'm very logical, very level-headed, but that thing sent a goddamn shiver down my spine. I stepped out of the car, keeping my eyes glued to the hanging decoration as I walked towards it. the sound of crunching leaves under my feet with each and every step. Reaching for the flashlight on my belt, I pointed the torch beam over towards the tree. Jesus, I could see why people had called this in. The texture on the thing's skin, it was very graphic, blotchy, and purple, almost like an actual corpse. I only took another few steps before I felt extremely foolish for my previous thought. The smell, the sickly sweet smell of death hung in the air, along with what I had thought was just a kitschy decoration. But it wasn't. It was an actual corpse that had been hanging there all goddamn day. Hundreds of kids must have walked past there, only a few of them actually recognizing that the thing hanging from the tree was a real cadaver. I felt sick. Sprinting back to my patrol car, I radioed into dispatch to get the coroner out to Jefferson Street as soon as possible. My dispatcher was absolutely terrified when she learned what had happened, that people had been staring at a goddamn dead body all day, many of them none the wiser. The hanged man was one Richard Dodd, a retired teacher who was reported to have been caught up in some vigilante pedophile ring. According to investigating officers, Mr. Dodd had been tricked into revealing questionable interest to individuals that were posing as an underage girl. When they threatened to go public with some of the despicable things he'd done online, Mr. Dodd had opted for the easy way out, systematically fashioning a rope and doing the deed, all without a thought for who might happen across his body. People give me a hard time for not being into Halloween as a holiday, for rolling my eyes when grown adults talk about how wasted they're going to get or what slutty costumes they have picked out. But if they knew the things that went on around them on that grisly night, things that are sometimes hiding in plain sight, I don't think they'd be too quick to celebrate. Do you? My family and I live throughout the middle of Georgia. Not many stories come out of this area, and this one I'm about to share makes us glad of that fact. My cousin, who I'll call Bob, had been a police officer for 5 years. He went into the force bright-eyed and optimistic, I guess like so many do. It sounds corny, but he genuinely wanted to make a difference and help improve the lives of the people in his community. One day, they got an alert from a house somewhere between Macon and Roberta. To hear Bob tell it, it was a place that people had thought was abandoned for years. Gives you an idea of the state that the houses were in. Anyway, when they arrived, an older gentleman was sitting on the steps outside the front door with his hands in his pockets. Bob and the other officer approached him and were alarmed to see that the man was crying. Well, not crying really, but sobbing. And he was also muttering something to himself about how awful it was. They tried to question the man, but the guy was completely incoherent. It didn't take but a couple of seconds to figure out that the poor guy was traumatized. As his partner called for another car, Bob drew his gun and decided to enter the house. The smell inside the house was overpoweringly rancid. He told me that the kitchen and living room were a total wreck. It was clear the owners of the house were hoarders. Pots and pans stacked damn near to the ceiling, spoiled food all over the table, takeout containers scattered all over the floor. Disgusting. As procedure dictates, Bob called out to see if anyone would answer. Silence. He told me that even with all his training and experience over those past 5 years, his heart rate was already building fast. Gun at the ready, he checked out the living room and saw nobody was there either. He made his way down the hall where the smell was getting much worse. Just as it all became too much, he covered his mouth and nose and opened the door to what he suspected was the bedroom. In the bed were 2 corpses, gray-skinned and covered with flies. Despite his churning stomach, Bob decided to go in for a closer look, a decision he says he's regretted since. One of the corpses was male, the other female. The skin on their faces was already starting to fall off, and the flies were flying in and out of their mouths. Some were landing and sitting on their eyeballs. As Bob inspected the female's corpse, he was horrified to find that she was holding an even smaller dead body, an infant. It wasn't until a large cockroach crawled out of the dead infant's mouth that Bob ran outside the house, doubled over, and threw up his lunch all over the steps the man had been sitting on. When the other cars finally arrived, they were able to do a more thorough inspection. The older man that Bob and his partner had met when they first arrived was a former co-worker and friend of the dead man. They'd worked together at a peach packing company. The man hadn't shown up for over a week, and he'd gone to their house to see if he was okay. The poor man was the first to see that horrible sight in the bedroom. The story that they put together was that the wife and husband had at some point become addicted to opioids. After some kind of operation a year or so before, they had started abusing painkillers together, and the addiction grew and grew until they started shooting up and snorting heroin. Their daughter, who wasn't more than a couple years old, had died of neglect. When the husband and wife discovered the baby's corpse, they finally broke completely and decided to end themselves. The coroner found enough heroin in both their bodies to kill them twice over. Bob's still on the force, but he's been drinking a little too much after that. He's been going to therapy and has since managed to get his drinking under control. But almost every time we talk, he says that he still has nightmares about that poor child's corpse. And in his nightmares, the baby's still crying.